So Ausfilm is really all about connecting international filmmakers to Australian businesses and talent. For us, creative collaborations between Australia and international partners is really critical to helping create a vibrant screen industry back in Australia and globally, I think. And this film, and why we're here today, is such a great example of how collaborators from 3 different countries can come together and work so well. We've got producers from Australia, we've got producers from the US and also from India, I believe. The project shot in both Australia and India, but it's also a project that really demonstrates how well the Australian system can work in allowing filmmakers to tell global stories. And I'm going to quote Mike, which I think sort of formed part of the description of today's, but Mike did say that Hotel Mumbai represents the Aussie system at its highest level, from originating IP to state funding bodies starting the ball rolling through to the producer offset and ultimately Screen Australia support. So that's really what we're here to talk about. And I'm just going to introduce the wonderful Mike Gabrawy and read his bio, so you've got his background. Mike is ArcLight's Chief Creative Officer. He started in the entertainment industry back in the 1990s, working in various roles in feature film production. Prior to being at ArcLight, he worked in production and development at Constantine Films, acquiring and developing their hit Resident Evil. While there, he also developed several projects based on comic book classics, including Fantastic Four and The Silver Surfer. He left Constantine in the early 2000s and went on to produce numerous independent films before joining ArcLight in 2008, and that was really to ramp up their involvement in the rapidly growing international co-production world. Since he's been at ArcLight, he's produced numerous films, including The Courier, directed by Academy Award nominee Hani Abu Assad, Bait 3D, which premiered at the 2012 Venice Film Festival and went on to become the highest grossing independent film in China when it was released, which is a pretty impressive feat. Reclaim, starring John Cusack and Ryan Felipe, and Outcast, starring Nicolas Cage and Hayden Christensen. So most recently, in addition to producing Hotel Mumbai, Mike has produced the true life survival thriller Jungle, also shot in Australia, starring Daniel Radcliffe, Triple Threat, which I believe had its premiere last night in New York. And also he served as EP on the Australian-Chinese co-production Guardians of the Tomb, starring Kellen Lutz, Li Bingbing and Kelsey Grammer. So we'll talk a little bit about co-productions as well later, since it's such a key part of what Mike does. I'm not sure how many people have seen the film. It's releasing here in New York and in LA on Friday. I've been lucky enough to see it twice. It is an incredibly intense experience. It deals obviously with a very difficult subject matter, and particularly obviously in light of recent events, particularly in New Zealand. So I do really want to start by saying congratulations to Mike and to the filmmakers for really making such a powerful film and approaching the events with real sensitivity and humanity and telling such an important story. And it's definitely, it's a remarkable first feature film for Anthony. I'm not sure if you know, but it is his directorial debut, and it's definitely got global attention for him as a director. I think, should we show also, welcome Mike.
Thank you, and thank you for that. That was very warm. Thank you.
What about me? Do we want to show the trailer just to sort of set the mood?
Sure, that would be a good idea.
I get chills just watching the trailer. So we might start at the beginning, and if you could just tell us a bit about how the project came about and creatively and the team.
Sure. I think it's, if I kind of talk through the line, it's like pretty much an encapsulation of what I was telling Kate about how amazing the Australian system is when it works like this. And I think it's a testament to this. So I can go. It's going to be a little bit of meandering story, but I think it represents why I think the two best subsidy, being an American, the two best subsidy programs in the world are Canada and Australia, and why I think of those two, Australia's kind of unparalleled in the world. And for a country with 20 something million people, it's punches above its weight in almost every category. So I think it's a testament to events like this. So the beginning of this is, I've been at ArcLight Films for almost 12 years now. So one of the benefits of that is that I get to meet all of the state bodies. Kate, we were just talking about, was one of the first people I met in Australia when she was working for Film Victoria. And I remember doing a proper tour of Victoria, of Melbourne, back in the day, and us having a great dinner that night. That was like 10 years ago, maybe? Yeah, it was
2008 or 9.
So in being at ArcLight for so long, I got to be very, very friendly with all of the state agencies. And one of the guys I was very friendly with, Richard Harris, who ran SAFC, the South Australian Film Corporation, so different states would introduce me to filmmakers that I should be tracking, and because we're an Australian company, it's just keeping track of talent. So he sent me a short film. He said, Anthony Maris, the director of Hotel Mumbai, Anthony's going to be in town. You should meet him. I'm going to send you a link to his short film. And he had done a short film called The Palace that was a harrowing short film set against the Greek Cypriot War in the 70s. And it's this amazing short film that was shortlisted for an Oscar that year and got a ton of attention, won a bunch of, I guess, AFI awards back in the day.
Yep, Actor Awards.
So I saw this short film. I'm like, wow, this guy's incredibly talented, really amazing short film. A couple months later, actually I'm going to rewind. This is how it's going to be meandering. We were finishing my Sharks in a Supermarket film called Bait 3D that you may or may not have heard of that we shot on the Gold Coast. And we were finishing that movie and racing. We had started getting a lot of attention out of China for it. And The Impossible came out, the film in Thailand that was about the tsunami that hits Thailand. And my boss, the head of the company, his name is Gary Hamilton, he called me after seeing this film. He's like, we should do a movie about the Taj. That's like, it's an amazing story. I'm like, well, let's get through the visual effects on Bait first. But he was scheduled to check into the Taj the day before the siege, and he got stuck. And that's why there were a lot of Aussies and filmmakers there, is they were all on their way to the Goa Film Festival. And he got stuck in Thailand in a coup. They took them off the plane back to their hotel. His father calls him and says, where are you? He's like, I'm stuck in Thailand. He's like, thank God, turn on the TV. So he was set to check into the Taj. So it was a story that was important to him, and he remembered it for a long time. So cut to a while, some period. That was like probably whenever The Impossible came out. So it was probably a couple years after the incident. And I get introduced to Anthony. He comes out. I meet him. Incredibly talented young filmmaker from Adelaide. Then a couple of months after that, at an event not dissimilar to this called Screen Singapore, that's the Singapore Film Trade Organization conference, I was invited to speak about Chinese co-productions. And I'm in Singapore, and I'm spending time at the Marina Bay Sands, like this amazing venue with all the Aussies, of course, and I'm hanging out with Ian Booth, who used to run Screen West. And what little I know about Western Australia is it has an amazing documentary tradition, and I'm a documentary freak. So I said, Ian, what documentary should I see? I'm a documentary freak. All I know is that WA has great documentaries. And he goes, when I get back, I'll send you two. I'm going to send you one called Pare's War, I think, that was an Aboriginal documentary, and Surviving Mumbai. And I said, oh, hold on. We want to do a movie about the Mumbai attacks. He sends me this documentary that's an international Emmy Award-winning documentary from a producer named Andrew Ogilvy out of WA. And the documentary is one of the most harrowing things I've ever seen. I can't even take what happened in that documentary and turn it into a feature because it would be so over-the-top heroic and so unbelievable. It was amazing stories. And being, again, provincial American perspective, it was news here for about a day and a half. Like the Mumbai attacks were like, oh, there was an attack. There was another attack internationally. And it didn't resonate like how big it was. So seeing this documentary, you realize there's 5 locations, like 3 days of terror. It's unbelievable. So I saw this documentary, and then of course the kind of light bulb goes, well, I know the perfect director for this because I just met him 2 months before. And we sent the documentary to Anthony. Gary and I sent it to Anthony. He responded. And, well, first of all, Ian Booth introduced me to the documentarian. We partnered up. I said, I have the perfect director. Gary and I approached Anthony to direct. And then in perfect form, Anthony's agent also represented John Colley. And John Colley being another one of those 5 kind of iconic Australian writers. And John came on board to write the script with Anthony, and they immersed themselves in India and Mumbai and like basically holed up there for months on end, back and forth. And we brought on Basil Lawanik, who's a big Thunder Road, who's a very big creative producer in Hollywood. He's done John Wick and Sicario and Wind River, like a very well-regarded creative producer. We brought him into the development process to work with us in developing it and putting it together. And I just remember Basil calling us and going, "Have you read the script yet?" We got the script in the middle of the week, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to read it on the weekend." He's like, "Drop everything. It's very good." And we read the script and essentially almost went into a polish, and then went out to our cast, and there were competing other Mumbai projects we were competing with much bigger filmmakers. And and everybody in the industry said this movie is unfinanceable. And I said, well, wait a minute, it's Australian. And then we proceeded to prove them wrong. And it turned out, I'm so proud of it. It's probably the best film I produced, so I'm incredibly proud of it. And it was just ultimately, from a film standpoint, it ended up being the filmmakers from Adelaide. It was an interstate co-production between WA and South Australia. And we had companies working from all over Australia, but especially out of Adelaide and Perth for the most part.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm assuming, when you say, you would have got a lot of pushback, and people were saying it was never going to be able to be made, given the subject matter. And when you say it's okay, it's Australian, you're talking about the financing support that is available there, and how much you can piece together out of Australia. Is that sort of what you're talking about there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this movie is such a good example of everyone. I always cite there's two agents that basically saw the potential here and got behind it, and one of them is Anthony's agent, a gentleman by the name of Adam Levine, and then Brandon Liebman, who represents both Dev and Army. And we almost had our first choice on all. The script was so strong, and you could look at Anthony's short film and connect the dots between the short film that he made and this amazing script. And it was just, it made sense. But you also walk in knowing we're going to get state support from one, if not two states, and you're going to get the offset, which all of a sudden gets you up to a certain level, the producer's offset. In tax credits, and then you go to Screen Australia and you make a case for why they should support this first-time feature director. And we got support from Screen Australia, from South Australia, from WA, from the beginning. Development money early on from WA. So it was.
Yeah, that really is a great example of how our industry is supported back in Australia, and it's very different, particularly to the US. There is so much government support at whether it's a federal or state level, and just going back to your point about the producer offset, and given I'm assuming there's a lot of Australian filmmakers here, it's just an absolute weapon that you guys have and that you're able to use. And in our office in LA, we're constantly having conversations with producers that are wanting to work in Australia and with that offset. And the only way, international filmmakers can do it is by really creatively partnering with Australian talent, and that's really Australian producers, writers, and directors. So I would imagine that in itself would, plays a big role in getting a film like this financed. But I would also imagine that, when you're talking to colleagues in LA and around the world now, there is probably is there sort of more recognition and understanding and enthusiasm to work with Australian talent because of this support mechanism that's in place?
I think there's if you look at Australia, in every kind of category, look at the Oscars, look at the Academy Awards, and how many Australians are recognized, and whatever is in the water at the ABC that produces these again Academy Award-winning cinematographers and directors. It's the support that they have in every field that comes out of Australia is, I think, unique for the industry. So I think people want to work with Australians regardless.
Yeah.
The fact that if they work with companies like us or they work with Australian producers to find out and by the way, in addition to all of that, the swing of the exchange rate also impacts us. And then once you get to a certain level, which you're at now, of 75 cents to a US dollar, that's another 25% increase of added value to your project. So I think it is something that's enticing, but also just there's great talent that comes out of Australia.
It does. I just think as Australian filmmakers, when you're going into meetings, it's something really good to understand and have a little bit of background and knowledge on, because not everyone has this. And if it's a competitive industry out there, and if you've got a great project, but you've also got this finance mechanism behind it, it does help elevate where you are in the competitive landscape. I do think in the conversations that we're definitely happening. We might just go back to the film and watch another clip for a moment. So this is the "Do You Have a Family" clip, which we'll just go to. Yeah, I mean, the tension from this film, it's unlike anything I've seen. And when we saw the premiere at TIFF, I remember sitting next to just a local festival goer who didn't know much about the program, and it was 6 o'clock, I think, on a Friday night, and he looked just on the schedule and was like, what can I get a ticket to? And he had one seat left, I think, for this film. And he just turned to me at the end and said, I never really knew what sitting on the edge of my seat felt like until I watched that film. I mean, you're literally at the edge, and it's incredible. And it's testament to what Anthony has done. And unfortunately, we can't ask him about it. But the intensity level starts there, and it just continues to build. And I just was wanting to ask, in terms of when you're telling a story that is based on such, horrific true events, but you're actually telling a story as well in a film, how do you balance that?
Such a good question. I mean, the documentary, that was a big part of it. I mean, Anthony poured over reading thousands of pages of transcripts. Anthony's family comes from a big family in South Australia, so he was connected to attorneys that were involved that had access to the transcripts because there was one surviving terrorist. So he poured over everything. He immersed himself in that world, and it got to the point, the depth of his research, and he's a beast of a guy. Like, he's so intense and so comes from a documentary tradition. He's like, and it's so authentic, and that's what people kind of always cite. So I think it's like our documentary is not, our film is not it's not a filmed version of the documentary. These characters, a lot of them are amalgams of a couple of characters or, elements of storylines that are taken from different places. But I think that it's trying to find that, it's trying to find the human access points to a story that is so horrific and making it eminently relatable and understandable in a three-dimensional way. I don't think anybody has said it better than Dev, who basically says this is an anthem to human resilience, and that's what it is. It's about that. It's about people from all walks of life, kind of coming together to survive a horrific situation.
And what was it like, I guess, on set, and how did Anthony go about sort of creating that intensity and then working with the actors? Because I can't imagine, it was an easy process. We watched The Nightingale last night, which was very similar, and it's this intensity, and you go, how, as an actor, do you sort of look after yourself whilst portraying these people?
Anthony was like, the fact that this is his first feature, I think, belies his incredible work ethic. Like, the guy is so seasoned. You would think he's a veteran. This is his 10th film. He's so talented at that. But the one example I can give, one kind of tangible example that I remember is a lot of the guys, Sunil and Amandeep, the guys that play the terrorists. He would have them in between their takes not interact with Army and Dev. Army's such a gregarious, incredibly sweet guy, so he's hanging out with us or hanging out with the crew and walking around. But he had the actors that were portraying the terrorists, they would not interact with the stars, and he would have them stand at a wall and face the wall and not have any interaction with them, so that they would, in the same way that in real life they would compartmentalize this part of it, so they weren't seen as human. Wow. In the same way, so he wouldn't have the actors, he wouldn't have the, I wish he was here because I'm sure he has 50 of those stories, by the way, and that's the one that I caught on my way to the craft service table. So those kinds of attention to detail of giving them a context for what they're portraying, and some of them had never acted before.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, there were non-actors in the film, so he would do these things to almost dehumanize them in a way.
Wow.
And get them familiar, and then I'd run into them on the streets of Adelaide, and they'd always travel in a pack, and they were like, we're in the movie, we're the two, and I'm like, you probably shouldn't do that on the streets of Adelaide. I don't think you should be doing that walking around in Adelaide. Gosh. But or anywhere right now.
So they all came out to Adelaide, obviously, which might lead. So the film, was obviously shot in Mumbai, but also quite a lot of it was shot on sound stages and around Adelaide. And if you could just talk about the split and how that went about in a city like Adelaide.
It's really interesting because you think automatically, like, well, if you're going to double Mumbai, of course you're going to do it in Adelaide. Like, where else would you shoot Mumbai, right? And then you realize, like, say what you will about the British Empire, that colonial architecture is in Singapore, it is in Adelaide, it is in Mumbai, And that stone kind of Tudor, so we ended up shooting the Shamiana, the restaurant, the chambers. We shot, which these mean nothing to you, sorry, but a lot of the interiors we shot in Adelaide, and the architecture is so similar. And then all the street stuff and the lobby of the Taj and a lot of the big grand Indian things with the massive amounts of extras, that was all obviously done in India.
And
so probably about half and half.
And did you have crews from both, or did you take, how much crew sort of movement was there between the two?
We had all our Aussie crew, and then we took all the department heads, as well as some of the kind of supporting people within those departments. So the art department, obviously, makeup, camera. A lot of the departments came to India, and I've done a number of films with Aussie crews traveling, and they're the best Aussies in general are the best travelers, but Aussie crews just kind of meld into international crews, and everybody falls in love. So
we do hear
they're
that.
awesome.
We would like our crews working at home more, but we do hear they travel everywhere.
Yeah.
And it must have been interesting, I guess, from an art department perspective, in sort of having these locations in India, and then 9,000 k's away, you're recreating them on a soundstage. So it's pretty impressive what they've done.
Yeah, it was amazing, and Stephen Jones Evans, our production designer, he's miraculous. He's amazing. We had an amazing crew. I mean, really phenomenal crew.
Yeah. It's we might just show the final clip before moving on. I just think that clip just so clearly shows sort of the sensitivity and the approach that they've taken to such horrific subject matter, and so poignant in this time. We might just move on and talk a bit about the distribution and the release. I mean, the film had its world premiere last year at Toronto to rave reviews, and it had its Australian premiere at the Adelaide Film Festival, and they also helped fund the film, I think, put in some finance. And I believe it won the Audience Award in Adelaide.
I believe so.
Yeah, so, and that's the festivals. Has it played other festivals?
I think that's it. I think Toronto, I mean, Bleecker, distributing in the United States is Bleecker Street, and they've been very protective. Obviously, that's why we're going to have a screening attached to this about where and when it's shown. So yeah, I think those are the main two.
And I guess just a general question, sort of how important is it to sort of have a film go through that festival release and have that platform to get out there?
I think it just really depends on the film. I mean, I have a film that opened last night that's a very different film, but and a much smaller film, but the economics have been remarkably similar, and it's a kind of unapologetic action film called Triple Threat. So that film didn't really have, it was invited to Sitges, which is a great festival, but we didn't end up going. So it really depends on the film. There are films that need the momentum of a festival. This film had a bit of a roller coaster journey to the screen just because we had our original distribution deal with the Weinstein Company. So while we were about to deliver the movie, they went into bankruptcy, and we had to spend 9 months, maybe 6 months, 9 months extracting it from the Weinstein Company, or the winning bidder. So it had a bit of a journey to get into the hands of Bleecker Street, which they've been fantastic.
And I guess that just shows that there's so many things in filmmaking that you can control, and then there's obviously so many things you can't control. I mean, it was caught up for a long time, obviously, in that, and then unfortunately in Australia, its release was the day before the events in New Zealand. So it's just something that you just have to be prepared for, I guess. And a film like this is the risk you take, but it's just shows, there's a lot you can't control. We might, before we open up to questions, just since we have Mike here and he does so much work in the co-production space and working with international partners, I just thought it might be good just to get his insights. And we were talking earlier about the partners, but I just, how important is it in looking outside Australia to find those partners, and what sort of impact can that have on your audience?
You mean for Australians?
For Australian
I mean,
films.
I think that's the whole industry. I talk about films that I feel like such a kinship with Australia. I've been with this Australian company for so long. All the friends that I've grown up with, everybody I just mentioned, whether it be Ian Booth or Richard, it's like they're college friends now. I've known them for so long. So I always talk about the Australian system. That was Gary Hamilton, the head of ArcLight. That was always his vision, was to make Australian films for the world market, for an international appetite. And that's what I think is an important, it's an important kind of mission, in that there are a lot of films that come out in Australia that do crazy business in Australia, but it has this insular component to it, where you have films like Paper Planes or Red Dog or Dressmaker. It's even a higher profile with some huge names, but they're not really known internationally. They're known in Australia. And I think that's how the industry actually grows, and how you as filmmakers and as artists utilize this amazing system, this amazing kind of support system that you have to make films that travel. The movie, a movie I did last year, a couple of years ago, Jungle, with Daniel Radcliffe. I mean, that's a film that's similarly production structured, and it's a period film, true story about Yossi Ginsberg, this backpacker who just happened to live in Queensland, but he's an Israeli guy that went, was seduced into the jungle by these guides in the 80s, and they get separated, and it's a survival story of him in the jungle for, I think it was 19 or 21 days. And that film we shot half in Colombia in South America and half the film in Mount Tamborine in Queensland. And Mount Tamborine actually looks more like the Amazon than the actual Amazon, just in case anybody's wondering. But it was another testament of taking that crew, and that film doesn't, Alex Russell, like, no Aussie accent, just looks like an American backpacker. We had great talent in front of and behind the camera that were Australian, and that film doesn't, it's not limited by a perception of being a regional film, or sadly, Australian films in the U.S. are perceived as foreign language films. So they're foreign films here, which is crazy, but and I think that's part of the, that's part of the challenge you have to overcome. So making films that work internationally, but that, that is Australian through and through. It's Greg McLean, it's Justin Monjo, it's ArcLight, it's a bunch of Aussie actors, and that's the Jungle example. Mumbai is John Colley, Anthony, ArcLight, and a bunch of fantastic actors and craftsmen.
So I guess, is there any practical advice you can give people in terms of if you're out there looking for new and international partners to help that? Like, what would you suggest?
Well, I'm curious, is the audience, are they producers, or like who here are producers or on the production side? Okay. And actors? Okay. Directors, okay. So I think, and when I was a younger producer, there's a sense that you have to do everything. You have to kind of find the financing, you have to develop the script, you have to do it. I think it's really important to find partners, and finding the best partners, and that offer strengths in what you may or may not be an expert in. And that's the most important thing. Find people that have access points. Basil Iwanek is an amazing creative producer. We had this movie, we found Kali, we had Anthony, but Basil, he's a great creative producer, but he also legitimized it in the space, right? So when WME, when the agency that represents the actors go, hey, what's going on with this project? He's like, it's amazing. This director's amazing, and vouches for it. Finding those kinds of partners is critical in building your team, building your filmmaking community that you're going to go on this journey with. And that's, I think, one of the most important partners. There was only one service producer. We worked closely with Corey Soderbeck, just first Australian completion bond, the Bond company. And I always consult her on wherever we're shooting remotely. And there was only one service company in India, and it's called ITOP, India Take One Productions. The best service company, an amazing, incredible professionalism in a really challenging place to shoot. So it's about your physical partners, your finance partners, your creative partners, and putting that team together so that you can, it takes a village, but it takes an even bigger village now, I think, than it used to. You need to have all those pieces together.
Yeah, and I think that's, you were talking earlier about events like this. We're very lucky to have the forum being put on here. Screen Australia obviously bringing delegates over to here, but to other markets as well. Ausfilm does events in LA, and so I know, from an Australian perspective, there's, there are avenues that you can sort of tap into to try and help to build those networks.
Yeah. I would say that I remember when I first started out, and I grew up in physical production, but then I consulted when I started producing my smaller films. I started working for, at the time it was called IFP West, which is Independent Feature Project. Now it's called Film Independent, and IFP East. And I used to spend a lot of time in New York, but those, that organization, for example, it is an industry of relationships. You just don't know, that's how this movie is the result of a cocktail on a rooftop in Singapore. None of it really adds up. And I'm like, I love documentaries. Well, here, see this documentary. You just never know where the inspiration, especially in this industry, where the connection is gonna come.
So yeah, it's really just making the most out of all those opportunities to meet people and get out there and network. We might open up to questions now if there's any in the audience.
Hi, Mike. You did mention, you were speaking earlier about making films in Australia that travel. And you did say that Australian films are perceived to be as foreign films. Is that due to dialect? Is that the main factor?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that the marketplace now is so, it just feels like there's a chasm between the, Guardians of the Galaxy, these huge tentpole movies, and Moonlight. And there isn't it's so expensive to release a movie. So the days of the Full Monty or, these, I'm trying to think of other foreign films I'm trying to think of Australian foreign films, like Muriel's Wedding, of a distributor, a small New York indie distributor getting behind it, running some reviews and getting the attention out there and being able to hold screen space. That doesn't exist anymore. Like it's kind of, the distribution model's all crazy. Triple Threat is a movie that went out on 200 screens. This is my action film that just came out, which is really fun. I went and saw it in Times Square, sold out. It's one night. And then it'll go from that one night on 200 screens, it'll go to 10 cities. And then from 10 cities, a week later, it'll be on VOD. Like it's like the distribution model has changed drastically as to how movies get out. So I think it's partially that, and I think it's about finding films. I find amazing foreign films, and they're really hard to track down. They're not automatically on one platform. You have to actually go seek them out.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your time today. So I'm a Brit living in New York and just premiered my movie at CineQuest. Hotel Mumbai was actually there, which was very cool. And I just wanted to ask you about diversity, how you're addressing that now, if that's something that's a concern, because I know that we're in show business. It's a business, and but there are very few female directors who get the opportunity that Anthony got in television and in film. So maybe talk about people of color, women, all that stuff, how it's being addressed.
100%. No, I think what we're looking at, because we have a pretty big appetite at ArcLight, so the way we're looking at it is there are certain titles now that we are looking specifically for female directors. So I will have lists of Aussie female directors. And I think that the initiatives, I know New Zealand has a really aggressive one that is very targeted at minorities and also for women, like supporting only female filmmakers. So it is, I just think it's horses for horses, is that the expression? Like it's finding, there are certain projects, one's a female home invasion thriller inspired by Audrey Hepburn's Wait Until Dark. So that's something that organically should be a female director and kind of builds this world. So I think it's about finding those projects. And I would say that I think that, if you look at other crafts in Australia, I don't know any male line producers in Australia. All the Australian line producers I work with are female, and they're the best. Barbara Gibbs, who is the unsung hero of this movie, is one of the best line producers in the world.
And I'll also just add, I mean, it's definitely a huge topic of conversation for all the agencies back home. So, at a state and federal level, there's lots of different programs that are really trying to tackle and provide opportunities for the diverse population.
Hi. So I'm an Australian living here for almost 6 years now. And when I first moved here, I felt the need to really fit into the American culture, to do everything as an American, especially as an actor. I have to walk into the room with an American accent a lot of the time. And only this year have I really opened up to the amazing resources that come from Australia. And it's amazing once you open that up, it's just a Pandora's box. I created a web series here, which I produced and star in. And I'm interested in the resources state-based, and maybe Kate, you can answer this as well. What's a good time to approach those agencies about help and funding? Is it before, obviously I did it all myself, so it's made, but is it, at ideas level, script level, if you've got a little piece to show that you've filmed, sort of what's a good time?
I think you definitely need something to kind of get traction within the agency world. I feel like you have to have a little bit of you have to have some pedigree to get the traction there. But all the agencies, Kate will be able to speak to this much more eloquently than me, but they all are accessible online and have incredibly user-friendly interfaces to educate you on what subsidies are available. What I would recommend, and that's probably just because I'm always trying to find the shortcut, is find a partner. Find somebody that's on the ground there. And by the way, the fact that you're here is a huge part of it. I think that part of the challenge for the Australian industry is it becomes too insular. So the fact that I have a lot of Aussie filmmaker friends that left when they were 19, and they know that system's there, but they wanted to make it kind of without that assistance. So I would go do the homework on all the agencies, go to these kinds of events, and like Ausfilm's website and every straight website, they all connect the dots, and you can become educated in a few days on the broad strokes of what's available to you.
I just wanted to follow up to the earlier question about Australian films traveling. I'm in a unique situation where I'm an American producer on an Australian film. I worked on Miss Fisher and The Crypt of Tears, and because that was based on a very popular Australian television series with a huge fan base here in the United States, I was able to bring hundreds of thousands of dollars in U.S. private equity into that film. And I'm wondering if anyone else knows of other Australian film stories like that, or is that truly a unique thing? Because that's a different way.
Well, I think if you have access to a lot of equity, you should definitely call ArcLight. You should call me. I'll make sure that's deployed in a responsible way. I think that's great. That's the secret ingredient. If you do that, to say that there's no shortage of amazing IP and stories and Australian stories that travel. We've been fortunate enough to work with the Sperrig brothers a couple times. I look at Predestination as an example of a film that is shot in Melbourne, I think it's set in Brooklyn, it's set in New York, and is this incredible film that Sony picked up for numerous territories. Red Hill traveled. Red Hill had a big theatrical, speaking of Oz directors. So I think it is finding those stories that are international or are accessible. This is an international film. Jungle was Jungle didn't feel regional. It felt like a survival story. And it's, from the guy who did Wolf Creek, so it just made sense.
Hi, thanks so much for your time. I'm primarily interested in the co-production aspect. I know that a lot of the benefits of doing a co-production with Australia, such as the offset, not requiring content requirement at that point, that is very reliant on your production partner for that co-production country that you're working with. A lot of connections that you might make come very organically, but in an instance like that, you need to find someone from that particular country. Do you have any sort of advice on how to know that you've found the right partner, knowing that your co-pro could fall apart if they are not the right partner?
That is like the question of the century. I think that is like the best question. No, that's a great question. No, that's like the most important question. Because I think that is the most important thing, because I think we have done a lot of really crazy, we are early adopters in China. We did a movie called Bait 3D ended up that movie premiered at Venice, and we're like, pardon? What? It's premiering at Venice? How did that happen? And then it goes on to do crazy business in China. And I think that is the most important thing, is identifying your partners. And the way I would do that is, there are 4 or 5 events. Like, once you get to a certain level, you really, as a producer, you're a producer, I'm assuming, you need to go to Cannes. You need to go to Berlin. You need to go to AFM. You need to go to Toronto, which is right up the road. And all these venues have, I spoke at the one in Cannes, which is the International Film Finance one. Those networking opportunities are critical. My secret weapon, I'll give you guys the best secret, is most producers try not kind of having the Bond too involved in their lives. I take it a completely opposite tack. And I think if I've seen a production problem, they've seen 10 times as many problems. I meet with all the Bond reps at all these markets, and I will tell them, hey, I'm looking at doing this film in this, I did a Canadian, French, Chinese co-production. And we had some really challenging partners on that. And I wish I had done more homework on our partners up front to save in a ton of those headaches. So meet with the bond companies, educate yourself on, like, you go Irish companies, call the Irish Film Board. It's the equivalent of Screen Australia, and they're happy to tell you, here are the most active co-producing partners, these producers. Canada's another one of these heavily subsidized programs, right? There are a handful of entrepreneurial producers there that we end up working with on more than one project. So it's such a good question, because it's a marriage, and that marriage can be 2 years or 6 years. And you are committing to this person, so you really need to know, because once they're in the trenches, you're along for the ride. It's like very difficult to untangle the arrangement. So just do your homework on everybody you meet. And all the film bodies, especially Australia and Canada and in Europe and elsewhere, the producers are known. And it's a good industry in that your reputation is your currency in this business. So you can find out what they've done. And look at the other films. If you have films that are comparable, you go, who did Brooklyn? Well, Brooklyn's an Irish co-production. I mean, how great is that? Like, or I think maybe an Irish film. But you can go, okay, look at the filmography of this producer. He's doing something right. Film Finances, which is the biggest bond company in the world. I'll go to the Film Finances rep in the UK, and I'll go, I need the 5 UK producers that I need to be tight with and get to know and see what projects they're working on, what projects I may have for them, that kind of thing. But that's it.
I think that's it for us. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.